Sharon Marie Tate was born on the 24th of January 1943 in Dallas, Texas as the oldest of three girls to Colonel Paul James Tate, a United States Army officer, and his wife Doris Gwendolyn, a homemaker. At 6 months of age, Tate won the Miss Tiny Tot of Dallas pageant, and yet her parents had no show business ambitions for their daughter. Paul Tate was promoted and transferred several times. By the age of 16, Tate had lived in 6 cities and reportedly found it difficult to maintain friendships. Her family described her as shy and lacking in self-confidence. As an adult, Tate commented that people would misinterpret her shyness as aloofness until they knew her better. She was constantly having to change schools also, which probably did not help in building lasting friendships. In the year Sharon turned 16, which was in 1959, she won 5 different beauty pageants that year alone. She was crowned Miss Richland, Washington, as well as the Queen of the Tri-City Autorama in Richland. In her acceptance speech, she shared her passion for psychiatry and goal to compete in the upcoming Miss Washington pageant in 1960, but this would not happen. Her family had to relocate to Verona, Italy due to her father's army duties. It was there that Tate discovered something almost unbelievable. She had become a kind of local celebrity. Residents and fellow army children had seen a swimsuit photograph of her on the front cover of the military magazine Stars and Stripes. She also shared with the other children the common experience of growing up in a military family and the instability that came along with it. Perhaps it was due to this that Tate was finally able to make lasting friendships. Everyone there felt just as displaced and lonely as her, creating a bond amongst themselves. Tate was a model student throughout her time in the Vincenza American Military High School. She played on the basketball team, was a cheerleader and baton twirler, served on the student council, starred as Juliet in the school's rendition of Romeo and Juliet, and was elected homecoming queen as well as senior prom queen. Yet, despite all of the recognition of her physical beauty and attentions from the outside world, Tate did not seem to see herself as anything outside of the ordinary, and once characterized herself during this time as a lone wolf. Happiness is all in the eye of the beholder, she once said. I think it should be. Absolutely. My appeal, whatever it might be, isn't obvious, at least to me. She became involved in a guileless romance with a young soldier despite her father's initial disapproval. But the whole family soon became fond of him. At times, when he was too preoccupied to leave the base, she would go on friendly outings with some of his fellow colleagues. On one of such occasions, she was raped. The hurt and embarrassment caused by what had happened kept her from reporting the crime or confiding in her family. She seemed no different, but was inwardly traumatized and suffered damage to her self-worth. Art Schlutz, a close friend and classmate, revealed, Sharon wouldn't have mentioned the because she wouldn't want to bring dishonor on her father, whose entire career was built on respectability. In 1961, she graduated after just a year, but her time at the school gave her a more grounded sense of self. In fact, it was her time there that helped her break into acting. She and her friends discovered that a movie named Hemingway's Adventures of a Young Man was filming on location nearby. It starred the likes of Richard Beymer, Paul Newman, Susan Strasberg, and the girls desperately sought and won parts as extras on the movie. Richard Beymer was said to have noticed Tate in the crowd, introduced himself, and the two dated during the production of the film, with Beymer encouraging Tate to pursue a career in the film industry. Perhaps the push from Beymer gave her the extra motivation to pursue a life on the big screen, but despite her Hollywood looks, Tate would face some struggle during her climb. She went on to become employed by the singer Pat Boone and appeared with him in an episode of the television series The Pat Boone Chevy Showroom. When the show Barabbas was being filmed in Verona, Tate was once again hired as an extra, and actor Jack Palance was so taken by her looks and personality that although her role was too small to judge her talent, he arranged a screen test for her in Rome. Unfortunately, this did not lead to further work. Disillusioned and deflated, she returned to the United States with the goal of furthering her academic studies. Yet the temptation of the big screen proved too strong, and she will take any and every opportunity to continue applying for auditions. Her mother back in Italy worried for her daughter's safety and suffered a nervous breakdown, forcing Tate to return to her family home in Italy, if only to put her mother's mind at rest. Tate and her mother were very close. Her and her husband were a very young couple when they decided to tie the knot. Doris was just 19 when Sharon was born, with her husband being in the service and Sharon being an only child for the first 10 years of Doris's life until her sister Deborah was born. One would imagine that they had a unique bond. When her family moved back to the United States in 1962, she made a beeline for Los Angeles, California. It was from here onwards that her luck changed. In a later 1966 article titled "Sharon Tate is a Modern Cinderella," she would state, "I'm a girl who met Richard Beymer in Italy where my father was stationed. He's an army colonel. Richard was making a film and I was 18 and he thought I could do something in pictures. So when he came back to America and settled in Los Angeles, he put me in touch with his agents, and I used to hitchhike to the studios to try out for parts. One day I went by Milk Wagon to audition for a bit in Petticoat Junction, the TV show, and, well, I got it. But when they took me in to see Mr. Ransohoff, he said no. He said I'm going to make this girl a star, and he put me under a long-term contract. But for 30 months, nobody outside of Filmways knew I existed. I was told I was a secret. I was being taught speaking, walking, dancing, fencing, calisthenics, and, of course, acting. And sometimes Mr. Ransohoff would give me a TV part, but always in a black wig and under another name. And sure enough, that is exactly how it went. Richard Beymer's agent was Harold Gefsky, who agreed to represent Tate after their first meeting. About Sharon, Gefsky would recall, "Everywhere Sharon went, people seemed to bend over backwards to do things for her, to help her out. When Sharon went to a restaurant, the owner would pay for her meal. It was like that everywhere she went. It was amazing." In 1963, Gefsky introduced her to Martin Ransohoff, director of Filmways Incorporated, who agreed to sign her onto a 7-year contract. When she was brought up for consideration in CBS's Petticoat Junction as character Billy Joe Bradley, Ransohoff declined, believing that Tate lacked the confidence to take on such a significant role, and Jeannie Riley was awarded the character instead. To help her gain experience to be prepared for bigger parts, Ransohoff gave her small parts in shows including Mr. Ed and the Beverly Hillbillies. Tate was quoted in a 1967 Playboy article saying, "Mr. Ransohoff didn't want the audience to see me till I was ready." In 1963, while having lunch with Hal Gefsky, Lee Wallace walked up to their table with 23-year-old Felipe 4K. "We were very attracted to each other," recalled Felipe. The pair talked at length after their introduction, then arranged a dinner date later. Sharon entered a relationship with the French actor while he was involved in the filming of Take Her, She's Mine. They were a picture-perfect couple. Attractive French movie stars were very prevalent in Hollywood throughout the 50s and 60s. Maurice Chevalier, Yves Montand, and Brigitte Bardot, and Felipe was no exception. He was highly regarded for his extraordinary good looks. He'd been swatted by producers at 20th Century Fox and was offered a contract. In 1962, he was flown to Hollywood to be groomed into the new French heartthrob. Take Her, She's Mine was his first international role, and in it he was playing the love interest who happened to be a French artist. People described him as shy, introspective, well-read, intelligent. A rising star, he'd quickly gained a loyal female fan base, receiving thousands of fan letters a week and featuring in fan magazines. Many even hailed him as the next Montgomery Clift. It was while working on the role that he fell in love with the young starlet Sharon Tate. "My God, they were a beautiful couple together," said Gefsky. "They got on very well and both turned heads wherever they went." Their relationship got serious very quickly, and by Christmas that same year, they were engaged. On meeting Sharon's parents, Felipe said, "I thought her dad was a very nice man. He was a sort of typical army man, rather quiet, reserved, but I think very straightforward kind of person who seemed to like me. I can't say that I liked her mother very much, though. She seemed to be more concerned about Sharon's career than Sharon herself. I remember all she talked about was money, 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 and all the money Sharon would lose if she quit acting." The Tates were not so happy with the development, deciding that Felipe would stand in Sharon's way to becoming a big star, and neither was her manager Ransohoff, who threatened to drop her contract if she did not break it off. Things weren't so picture perfect behind the scenes for the couple either. In fact, it was tumultuous at best. Word of their engagement leaked to the press, coupled with the lack of support from those close to them, and these issues began to take a toll. There were rumors of infidelity. Sharon grew nervous and Felipe uncertain. Disagreements allegedly erupted into shouting matches which turned into violent confrontations as they both struck out at each other, not just with words but with fists, shoes, plates, and glasses. Felipe claimed that once Sharon cut him across the chest with a broken wine bottle and at another time stabbed him with a pair of toenail clippers. Yet the larger, stronger Felipe, rumored to have had a bad temper, came out of such confrontations less battered than his fiancée, who he allegedly once kicked so severely that she had to be rushed to the UCLA Medical Center, where she was admitted for emergency treatment. Still, she stayed, indignant to work things out. Her parents tried to intervene, but the relationship went on for about almost a year, until Fourcade fled to New York and finally back to France. "It took me 10 years to recover from being with Sharon. I wouldn't allow myself to fall in love again," he said. Sharon, when asked about the relationship by the press, would only allude to the romance but never the abuse. "I need a strong, secure man, someone who leads but doesn't dominate," Sharon admitted in an interview. "And at the same time, he's got to be sensitive and adventurous, someone who likes to do different things all the time. A man is sensitive to me when he's vital and creative. What he looks like in the mirror is strictly secondary." Months later, she was introduced to celebrity hairstylist Jay Sebring by journalist Joe Hyams. Unknown to her, their meeting was no coincidence, as Jay convinced his journalist friend to set up an interview he could crash. Although Sharon was only an upcoming act at the time, Jay was a decade her senior, had hit his professional momentum, inventing a whole new way of cutting men's hair, according to the New York Times. Like Sharon, Jay had come to Hollywood in search of fame. With dark brown hair and eyes, he was stylish and well known in the industry, boasting a loyal catalog of celebrity clientele. Although he suffered from personal insecurities of his own, both about his middle-class background and about his height, at 5 feet 6 inches tall, he constantly felt overshadowed by others. To compensate for his short stature, he indulged in a flashy and extravagant lifestyle, driving expensive trendy cars, attending important parties, and moving in elite Hollywood circles. Following his separation from ex-wife Cami Sebring, he became such a prolific dater that he reportedly was the partial inspiration for Betty's shampoo character. Jay had a private room for his steady clients so that they wouldn't have to be seen by the other customers, revealed Dominic Dunn. "I had a regular appointment every 3rd week, and it was in that room that I met Sharon Tate. She would often be sitting there in a chair just to be with Jay as he worked. She looked so young that I thought at first she was coming there after school. She was quiet and friendly and smiled a lot at our conversations. Jay couldn't stop looking at her." The day before Tate left Los Angeles to film Eye of the Devil in London, Dunn said that he and Sebring toasted to Sharon with champagne. In spite of Sebring's reputation for being promiscuous after his separation, the hairdresser became infatuated with Sharon. She began spending most of her free time at his home just north of Hollywood and Bel Air, above the Los Angeles basin, which provided a rustic rural setting just minutes away from the city. They dined together at Hollywood's most exclusive restaurants, ending their evenings in smoke-filled jazz clubs over martinis. Her family was also fond of him, with her sister saying, "He treated Sharon well, he was gentle." I know that Sharon also appreciated his ability to take charge. Despite his gentlemanly charm, Jay also had a darker side, as all humans do. He had begun experimenting with hallucinogenic substances around the period of meeting Sharon. It was at the precipice of the hippie era, and values were quickly changing. And under his influence, Sharon also became introduced to the habit. "I was a very tight knot, too embarrassed to dance, to speak even. It opened the world to me," she was later quoted saying. These substances were very easily accessible in the Hollywood circles they both moved in, and Jay was even recognized as a contact for many of the rich and famous. Another of his peculiar quirks was his penchant for sadomasochism, silk cord ties, whips, sashes, often taken photographs. Sharon would later reveal to Roman Polanski that Jay approached these encounters in a gentle, rather disarming way, and that although she went along with his requests, she found his fetishes funny but sad. Jay made no secret of the fact that he was really in love with her, Sebring's friend Skip Ward told King. "I think he would have been perfectly happy to settle down with her and have lots of kids." Sebring often discussed marriage with Sharon, which she would often brush away as she felt too young to become a wife. Still, as a symbol of her commitment, Sharon gave Jay her high school class ring as a temporary keepsake. Career-wise, Sharon continued to take a stab at larger roles only to be rejected. In 1964, she made a screen test for The Cincinnati Kid, only to be denied in favor of Tuesday Weld. She auditioned for the role of Liesl in The Sound of Music but was unsuccessful, but her experience continued to grow as she took on minor TV appearances in which Ransohoff was named a producer, such as the Americanization of Emily and A Sandpiper. Her big break finally came with the occultic thriller Eye of the Devil, otherwise known as 13 in its British release, based on the novel Day of the Arrow by Philip Lorraine. It tells the story of a rural pagan cult who carry out human sacrifice in order to attain a bountiful harvest. She was faced with doing a very big and very important part. Could she do it? J. Lee Thompson would state in Ransohoff's documentary All Eyes on Sharon, released at the same time as the movie to boost her personal promotion. That was all in our minds. We even agreed that if after the first 2 weeks Sharon was not quite making it, that we would put her back in cold storage. Very soon we all realized that here was a girl who was tremendously exciting. She has that thing that you can't really explain, that star projection. The documentary lasted a short 14 minutes and consisted of a number of scenes depicting Sharon filming Eye of the Devil, dancing in nightclubs, sightseeing around London, and also contained a brief interview with her. Asked about her acting ambitions, she replied, "I don't fool myself. I can't see myself doing Shakespeare." She shared her hopes of finding an audience in the comedic genre and her ambition of becoming a light comedian in the Carole Lombard style. Some of her other big influences were Faye Dunaway and Catherine Deneuve, who she particularly admired for playing beautiful, sensitive, deep parts with a little bit of intelligence behind them. Although she only appeared in a dozen scenes in Eye of the Devil's final cut, she was listed 7th in the opening credits and was considered crucial to the film. But Sharon was in awe of her co-stars, saying, "Deborah Kerr is my idea of an actress and a woman and a person, and I learned so much from her." Deborah in turn will go on to state, "Given the right breaks and a reasonable amount of luck, Sharon would be a great success." Regarding David Niven, she said, "When I was younger, I thought this is the man I'm going to marry. So when he came up and I told him, well, that I had plans on marrying you for many years, he was so suave and so elegant and so handsome and so witty." David, who seemed equally impressed with Sharon, stated, in summary, "Sharon is a great discovery." Upon release, the film failed to find an audience, and most reviews were indifferent, neither praising nor condemning it. The New York Times wrote that one of the few highlights was Tate's chillingly beautiful but expressionless performance. Much of the filming took place in France, but she also spent some time in London, accompanied by Jay, prepping for filming and doing research. Jay was later forced to return to Los Angeles due to business concerns, while Sharon chose to stay even after filming had ended, immersing herself in the fashion and clubbing culture. She sent an invitation to her friend Wendy Wagner to join her in the city, and together they were often chauffeured around town by Jay's friend Victor Lowndes. They were having a lot of fun, he recalled, enjoying the shopping during the day and the party scene at night. Victor will go on to host a luncheon for the two and invite a dozen of his friends, one of whom was Roman Polanski. Polanski had signed a contract for the financing of his unreleased projects, The Fearless Vampire Killers, through MGM Studios. In his excitement, he naively did not look over the detailed conditions leading to him giving rights to Ransohoff for the final American cut, as well as dictation of terms, a blunder he would come to regret. Polanski had already decided who he wanted as his female lead, the red-headed actress Jo St. John, whom he had been briefly linked to in the press. Ransohoff had other ideas, one of which was his insistence on casting Sharon instead of Jill. Roman knew little of Sharon except for their first meeting at Victor's luncheon. I thought she was quite pretty, but I was not at the time very impressed. Sharon herself had the same aversion even while under pressure from Ransohoff. She reluctantly did her best again and again to impress the director over dinners at quiet restaurants. She branded him a weirdo, saying, "That's the craziest nut I ever saw. I'll never work for him." Ransohoff was not willing to budge, and Polanski eventually gave in on the condition that Sharon would don a red wig for the role. Polanski had originally wanted to shoot at a castle in Austria, but weather issues thwarted that plan, so he settled on Bar Gardena near the Italian ski resort of Ortisei. There, a makeshift castle of Polanski's vision will be constructed. Sharon arrived to the city in the midst of a snowstorm, but she soon settled in as her fluent Italian helped her warm up to the local crew members. She found Polanski to be an overcritical and demanding director, as he constantly picked apart her scenes, never finding her efforts enough no matter how hard she tried. Polanski would later gloat that in one of her scenes, he had her run 70 takes before he was satisfied with her performance. Though Sharon often felt humiliated and demoralized, she accepted the dynamic as typical of Polanski. Mike Mindlin, the vice president of advertising at Filmways, recalled, "Sharon used to come to my hotel room at night and cry on my shoulder because of the way Roman had treated her." Polanski himself played the major character in the film, Alfred, the apprentice who falls in love with Sarah, the tavern keeper's daughter, played by Sharon. As the weeks went by, Sharon only grew in confidence, both in front of the camera and maneuvering Polanski's direct manner of direction behind it. Polanski in turn praised her improvement. At the end of each shoot, they spent more and more time together, to the point that other cast members felt Sharon was showered with more attention and favor than was fair, brewing jealousy. By this time, Sharon had not seen Jay in almost 6 months. Perhaps her feelings for him had faded with passing time and distance. The relationship between the director and his muse became serious and continued even after filming ended, when they moved back to London. When the edited version of the movie finally came out, Polanski was distraught, accusing Ransohoff of butchering his film. Newsweek tagged it as a witless travesty, going on to say, "This bloody bore of a takeoff on vampire movies by some apprentice gangsters who will never be half the half-man Dracula was. The film gets some laughs, maybe one per reel." Time magazine's contribution read, "Neither spooky nor spoofy, The Fearless Vampire Killers never manages to get out of the coffin." With reviews like this, it was a financial failure. Although Sharon's nude scenes were referenced by Variety, noting that she looks particularly nice in her bath, the quality of her acting performance seemed to be a non-factor. The pair made a physically odd couple, and Polanski to many did not seem like an ideal man for Sharon. He stood at 5 feet 5 inches tall, had frequent outbursts, and a demanding style of communication that many unaccustomed to him would attest to. "It's very difficult to describe Roman," she once said. "The first thing you notice about him is him." No bits or pieces, he just comes at you in one dynamic blast. If I had to break it down, he's very sympathetic, very sensitive, very intelligent, very understanding, and a combination of explosives. He's a very strong man. I mean, mentally. Because physical looks and stuff don't mean that much to me. I would say that Roman is interesting looking. And you don't dwell any further on that because of the kind of person he is. Polanski, despite his abrasiveness, seemed to have a boyish charm which helped him smooth past tricky situations when it came to relating to people. His well-manicured image seemed of utmost priority to him, and his worldliness was very attractive to women, and he had a reputation as a womanizer. I have a very firm theory about male and female intelligence, Roman would go on to explain in a future 1971 interview. It causes an absolute outrage if you say that women on average are less intelligent than men, but it happens to be true. I must admit that I hardly find an intelligent female companion with whom I can get along. I do dominate them, and they like it. Some of Sharon's close friends reveal that Sharon often felt inadequate while out in public during social gatherings with Roman, to the point where she hardly opened her mouth to chime in on conversations. This was a trait Polanski found endearing, as well as her eagerness to please. She was so sweet and so beautiful that I didn't believe it, said Polanski. I was waiting a long time for her to show her colors, but she was beautiful, without this phoniness. She loved me. She was a f***ing angel. I was living in a different house and I didn't want her to come over, and she would say, I don't want to smother you, I only want to be with you. And I said, you know how I am, I screw around. And she said, I don't want to change you. She was ready to do everything just to be with me. Some might think it's somewhat sad in retrospect that Sharon was willing to accept such a dynamic. Judy Kotowski, a friend of Polanski, who became a mutual friend of Sharon's after their relocation back to London, revealed that she expected her to be nothing more than just another beautiful and not too bright American girl. But upon relating to her, realized that she was completely free of neurotic ambitions usually associated with actresses. She was naive, but also had this tremendous unaffectedness and sense of decency and loyalty that really impressed people. Yet, as impressed as she was by Sharon's personality, Judy would also go on to state that she sensed deep insecurity in her, which played out externally in a need to be both accepted and dominated by men. Polanski, who was averse to commitment since his divorce to ex-wife Barbara Lass in 1962, could not object as bits and pieces of Sharon's belongings became permanent pieces in his home, which was just around the corner from hers. In April 1967, she finally moved in with him at number 46 Lower Belgrave Street. We used to wander around the city, recalled one of her friends, shopping for clothes at Granny Takes, A Trip or Indica, and lunching at Alvaro's. She seemed content, really, at peace, and very much in love. All day long she would talk about what Roman had done, who he was seeing, what they were planning for that evening. I've never seen someone so completely absorbed with another person. They moved in the wealthy hippie circle where soft and hard hallucinogens were always in free flow. They were always of high demand for events. Sharon in her stylish boots and miniskirts, which was the look back then, and Polanski in his Regency finery. She especially was said to often cause a stare with her entrance. Her presence in a crowd is as insignificant as a floodlight in a blackout, declared one reporter. But this greatly worried Sharon, as she did not want the news of their affair to be reported back to Jay. In order to avoid a tricky situation, she decided to let him know herself, so he wouldn't have to hear it from a third party. It was a fine relationship, but the truth is, I was no good for Jay, she confided to a friend. I'm not organized, I'm too flighty, Jay needs a wife, and at 23, I'm not ready for wifehood. I still have to live, and Roman is trying to show me how. Jay immediately booked a flight headed straight for London and met up with who he considered to be the love of his life, asking her again to marry him, convinced that it was some sort of mistake on her part. But Sharon firmly refused his proposal plea. She said she was happy and in love, but Jay could not accept this. So Sharon arranged for the two to meet each other, like some sort of introduction. Polanski's immediate response was a resounding no, but the day after, she was at a restaurant dining with Polanski when to his horror she waved across the room to a man seated in a shadowy corner of the hall and ushered him over to their table. He and Sharon exchanged a kiss, and then he shook Polanski's hand and introduced himself, saying, "I just wanted to meet you." Polanski, visibly uncomfortable, squirmed in his seat while Jay questioned him like a concerned father of his intentions towards Sharon, his feelings towards her, his background, his past, and what future he saw with Sharon. Finally, he said to the director, "I dig you, man. I dig you." He seemed to take things graciously, but friends of his would go on to say that he was actually devastated as he was still in love with Sharon. Nonetheless, he chose to maintain close ties with the two, becoming a major figure in their inner circle of friends and one of Sharon's closest confidants. In his book Roman, published in 1984, Polanski would go on to state that Jay was a lonely and isolated man who viewed Sharon and himself as his family. Jay would never stop wearing the promise ring Sharon gave him during their relationship. In fact, he would wear it till his dying breath. In 1966, Sharon returned to the US to film Don't Make Waves. It had a secondary part for a female skydiver character called Malibu, which had originally gone to Julie Newmar. But when she dropped out due to finding the physical aspects of the role too demanding, Rantahoff sought for Sharon instead. She had built a bit of a reputation for herself through her previous roles, and she would have more screen time than she ever had. She was also paid $750 a week, which was quite generous for the time. The movie was based on Ira Wallach's novel Muscle Beach. For most of the movie's runtime, Sharon's character Malibu would be clad in only a bikini and included several intimate scenes with co-star David Draper, which seemed to make her uncomfortable. A couple required stunts also triggered her fear of heights. She'd send letter after letter to Roman telling him how much she missed him, giving detailed summaries of her days in California. Fortunately, she wasn't completely isolated from the people she loved, as her father had been reassigned to Fort Barry near San Francisco, so she was able to visit not only her parents but her two younger sisters also, Debbie and Patty Tate. Unfortunately, the movie would open to poor reviews and mediocre ticket sales, with Sharon later confiding to a reporter that it's a terrible movie, before stopping herself from saying any more. After Alfred Hitchcock turned down the director role for Rosemary's Baby, Robert Evans, Paramount's vice president in charge of production, recommended Roman Polanski as a replacement. Polanski returned to the US accompanied by Sharon to begin filming. He would later reveal that he had wanted Sharon to be placed as the picture star, but couldn't suggest her himself without making things awkward. Unfortunately, her name was never brought up by those who counted, and Mia Farrow was cast instead. The multi-picture deal meant that Sharon and Roman needed to have a permanent residence in Los Angeles. Eventually, they settled on a lot along Oceanfront Highway at 1038 Palisades Beach Road. The house overlooked the length of the Santa Monica Beach and the Pacific Ocean beyond. Roman would describe it as Hollywood's film set of the 30s. "It's perfect," Sharon would mutter, while gazing at the picturesque view from the beach. "Roman and I will be so happy here." Her parents would visit the new home, meeting a nerve-wracked Roman for the first time with a Yorkshire Terrier puppy as a housewarming gift. Roman described them as cordial, but rather boring. Her father I liked very, very much. Her mother was very warm towards me and very sympathetic, but she was too much for Sharon and for me in a way, kind of peddling mysticism. Her father was a lovely man. I think they both loved me. Sharon would often loiter around the film set while Polanski worked and ended up being photographed there by Esquire magazine. Upon publishing, the images generated buzzing publicity for the upcoming film. Perhaps it was the aura of the set due to the project being worked on, but a few friends gave testament to her growing interest in the occult at the time, with a friend quoting her in print several years later having said, "The devil is beautiful. Most people think he's ugly, but he's not." In 1967, Sharon was cast for the role of Jennifer in Valley of the Dolls. 20th Century Fox implemented a rule unheard of at the time that no one would be cast unless they auditioned, which sent shockwaves throughout Hollywood as star power actors and actresses protested that it was beneath their dignity to have to audition. But Sharon wanted the role so bad, seeing the opportunity as a way to establish herself as a serious artist and gain a foothold in the Hollywood scene. To a reporter, she said, "Since the book was a runaway bestseller, I was sure the leading roles would go to big-name stars, like Natalie Wood or somebody like that. But I was just thrilled to get the role. I liked Jennifer as I read the book. I think she's the most sympathetic girl in the group. She's sweet, unspoiled, and unselfish. She doesn't mean anyone any harm, and yet terrible things keep happening to her." Yet in private, she confided to Polanski that she did not like the book or the script. Filming itself was also an ordeal, as one of the starring actresses, Julie Garland, who played the character Helen Lawson, was fired just 3 days into shooting after she was exposed for drinking and taking pills in her trailer before each of her scenes. She was quickly replaced with Susan Hayward. Gossip magazines and Hollywood press in general were always filled with accounts of conflict and petty squabbles between the stars, and particularly the actresses on the film set, whether manufactured or genuine. During a romantic scene between Barbara Parkins and Paul Burke, one reporter claimed, "The people in the background were hushed. Sharon, who happened to be among the bystanders, began to move by shifting her weight from leg to leg. Just that. But the men noticed, and the attention was taken away from Barbara." One of the people present that day chuckled, and he recalled, "The idea that Miss Tate with clothes on was getting more attention than Miss Parkins, writhing naked in bed under hot lights, must have made every smile a tough job of acting for Barbara." But nothing was more stressful than the pressures imposed by the director himself, Mark Robson. He already had a reputation of being condescending and abrasive on set, with a tactic of humiliation as a way to push for a better performance. In usual manner, Robson was consistent in his harshness to the other two starlets, Duke and Parkins, who were much more seasoned actresses with enough experience to push back and stand up for themselves. Sharon, on the other hand, who was inexperienced and not as self-assured, was more defenseless. Robson would constantly reprimand Sharon for the littlest things, like which foot she placed before the other while entering a scene, making her do it over and over again for hours. Or perhaps it was the way she sat, breaking down her body movements to the most minute details like a dunce. It was truly demeaning, her co-star Patty Duke would confirm, and that Robson continually treated Sharon like an imbecile, while she definitely was not, and she was very attuned and sensitive to this treatment. At one of these prolonged tirades, Sharon would break down and run off set in tears. Perhaps Sharon's initial dislike for the project and script, as confided in Polanski, was due to what she thought to be the flatness of her character Jennifer North, a woman described as a beautiful chorus girl with limited talent and not much but her looks to rely on. But Sharon was determined to make something of what she'd been given. "I don't go into this person as thinking of her just as," she explained in an interview during the film's production. "I would stop and I would think, well, how is she mentally? And therefore I don't really think of the character as being a symbol or a goddess or whatever you'd like to call it." Sharon herself was viewed similarly to the character and expressed her affinity with her. Look magazine wrote an article about the film and in it described Sharon as a hopelessly stupid and vain starlet. Sharon, on the other hand, had nothing but good things to say about her co-stars, whom in turn had nothing but good things to say about her. She would gush over Lee Grant, saying, "I learned a great deal about acting in this film, particularly in my scenes with Lee Grant. She knows what acting is all about, and everything she does, from little mannerisms to delivering her lines, is pure professionalism." Regarding Sharon, Patty Duke would later recall, "She was a gentle, gentle creature. You could be mean to her and she would never retaliate. I was crazy about her and I didn't know anyone but our director who wasn't. What's the dislike? All the women developed the close friendship that continued after the completion of the film. The difficult-to-please Robson himself would later comment to Polanski when he met him walking along the Sunset Strip one day. "That's a great girl you're living with. Few actresses have her kind of vulnerability. She's got a great future." Towards the end of filming, Look magazine sent one of their writers to do a piece on the production called The Dames of the Valley of the Dolls. In it, writer Betty Rowland did little to hide her disdain for the project, which she referred to as that candy box of vulgarity, tagging Parkins as a mental nonentity and Duke as today's sewer mouth. Sharon she labeled as vain and stupid, exposing her unwillingness to start the interview until after 2 hours of applying makeup, detailing her preceding rant on wanting to be taken seriously as an actress and the weight of others' expectations. Reviews were abysmal upon the film's release. All a fairly respectful admirer of movies can do is laugh at it and turn away, wrote the New York Times. Newsweek added that the film has no more sense of its own ludicrousness than a village idiot stumbling in manure. But a later article read, "Astoundingly photogenic, infinitely curvaceous, Sharon Tate is one of the most smashing young things to hit the Hollywood scene in a long time." It seemed the consecutive disappointments of her career caused her to focus inwards on her personal life and relationship for comforts. "You're the better half," she lamented to Polanski. The two returned to London in late 1967 and continued to be popular features by the press on newspaper and magazine articles. "We have a wonderful relationship," she responded to the New York Sunday News. "My definition of love is being full, complete. It makes everything lighter. I love Roman, but I can't honestly say that right now, today, I want to marry him. I think marriage should have a true meaning behind it. I would never do it just to be respectable. I feel sorry for girls who go to bed with men without any emotion. Even if you have an affair that doesn't end in marriage, it's still important to experience the feeling." Polanski, on the other hand, was a bit more non-committal. During the filming of Rosemary's Baby, Mia Farrow had overheard Polanski debating John Cassavetes. Roman was discussing about the impossibility of long-term monogamy given the brevity of a man's sexual attraction for any one woman. An impassioned John Cassavetes responded that Roman knew nothing about women or relationships, and that he, John, was more attracted than ever to his wife, Gina Rowlands. Roman stared at him and blinked a few times and for once had no reply. To continue the relationship, Polanski made it clear to her of his need for total freedom and desire to see who he pleased when he pleased. Sharon, who was raised Catholic, was not morally or socially accustomed to such an agreement, but decided she was willing to meet his needs out of love. Polanski told Playboy magazine much later in 1971, "At the beginning of our relationship, I was afraid of getting too deeply involved and losing my freedom. But she was extremely understanding, tactful, and clever. Being around me, she still made me feel absolutely free. She did not make demands. She made it clear that she was not going to engulf me. I remember once her words, 'I am not one of those ladies who swallow a man.'" At times he did not return home for the night and would often brag about his newest conquest to their mutual friends. Roman didn't go to a lot of trouble to hide his affairs, confirmed Victor Lowndes. Some would even report back to Sharon tentatively in casual conversation, but she often brushed things off with an air of indifference. "No matter what happens," she told a friend, "I always know Roman will come home to me at night." Photographer Peter Evans described them as the imperfect couple. They were the Douglas Fairbanks and Mary Pickford of our time. Cool, nomadic, talented, and nicely shocking. Tate reportedly wanted a traditional marriage, but Polanski remained promiscuous and described her attitude to his infidelity as Sharon's big hang-up. He reminded her that she had promised not to change him. Tate accepted his conditions, though she confided to friends that she hoped that he would change. Peter Evans quoted Tate as saying, "We have a good arrangement. Roman lies to me and I pretend to believe him." The idea that Sharon would consider the same freedoms for herself was never a serious consideration, not even to herself. She would be quoted saying, "I wish to have the tolerance to let everybody have complete freedom. To be able to take a man home and make love and enjoy it without some lurking, puritanical guilt interrupting the pleasure. I get frightened. I get really frightened. Mentally, it's what I want, but emotionally, it's more difficult to take." Polanski himself would often display hints of jealousy over Sharon and her interactions with other men, but to her this only served as reassurance and fulfilled her need to be possessed. When their Santa Monica mansion lease expired, they chose to live a semi-nomadic lifestyle for a while instead of tying themselves down to another home base. They rented rooms at the Sunset Marquise, a respectable apartment complex in the center of Hollywood, but Sharon quickly convinced Polanski to relocate to the Chateau Marmont, overlooking Sunset Boulevard. It was a time of bliss and endless socializing as they welcomed the flow of guests to their apartment, which they stayed at for a couple months. Friend and former Playboy bunny Charmaine Leland St. John, who was one of the frequent visitors, would comment about Sharon saying, "Sharon was the sweetest creature I'd ever met. Very smart, but very stupid too. Once she was sitting on a chair and watering this plant. She would empty a pitcher and go for some more water and do it again as we sat there wondering when it would occur to her that the water was going straight through the pot and down onto the carpet." Soon they settled on a new living space and rented Patty Duke's home above Benedict Canyon in the Hollywood Hills, located at 1600 Summit Ridge Drive. They frequently entertained guests at their new home, as Polanski would often bring friends back with him unannounced. Their home was such an open space that at times strangers would even wander in. Leslie Caron commented that the Polanskis were too trusting, to the point of recklessness. Sharon regarded the casual atmosphere as part of the free spirit of the times, saying that she did not mind who came into her home, as her motto was live and let live. Hosting and general domesticity were skills she seemed to thrive at. She enjoyed cooking, with her specialities including Virginia ham and upside-down cake, both recipes passed down from her mother. This was a happy, blameless period, Roman would later recall. There were lots of parties at people's houses, on the beach or in the mountains, and often Sharon would make dinner. And there was this magnificent group of friends who would come to our house, and we would sit outside where it was warm, with the sky full of stars, and listen to music, or talk for hours about films, politics, or whatever. Their social group included some of the most successful young people in the film industry, a little removed from Hollywood's established society. Names such as Steve McQueen, Warren Beatty, Jane and Peter Fonda, Dennis Hopper, and more. Eventually, Sharon would decide she needed assistance and hired 45-year-old Winifred Chapman as a live-in maid with a salary of $200 a week. She would later move with the couple into their Cielo Drive home. As time went by, Sharon placed less and less importance on her career. Her childhood as an army brat, her father's long periods of separation from her mother and sisters due to postings overseas, and instability caused by several relocations up till her teenage years might explain her eagerness to create the cookie-cutter family life she never had. She became more and more irritated by Ransohoff's control over her image, believing he was deliberately slowing down her progression, overlooking the amount of investment he had made on her success. She didn't come to this conclusion alone, as Polanski himself continually urged her to cut ties with a man who he had never really got on with. She decided to meet with Ransohoff and informed him she wanted to start a family in order to terminate her binding contract with his production 3 years earlier than agreed. To her surprise, he ceded. They had been together for 2 years now, and the topic of marriage was sprinkled into their conversations more and more. "Polanski wants to marry me. I don't know what to do," she confided to Harry Falk. When he warned her to consider Polanski's past history as an indicator of future behavior, she said, "Thank you. You saved my life. I'm not going to throw away my life by marrying this little putz." Yet, while having dinner one night in a restaurant, Roman brought up the topic once again in an almost matter-of-fact manner. "I'm sure you would like to get married," he said to her from across the table. When Sharon quickly agreed, Roman declared, "We'll get married then." and that was that. The wedding was put together on short notice. Sharon's family were in California, but Polanski insisted on holding the ceremony in London, where most of their friends were, and she agreed. She also gave up on the idea of a traditional church wedding and had a civil ceremony at a registry office instead. Victor Lowndes sent out telegrams to about 50 friends and acquaintances. "You're cordially invited to the Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski wedding reception at the Playboy Club this Saturday, 20th of January 1968 at noon. Informal brunch." It was all thrown together in a day or two, Lowndes recalls, full of chaos and energy, but they seemed to live their lives that way, in a sort of spur-of-the-moment existence. Lowndes also threw Polanski a bachelor party the night before, which slightly upset Sharon. On the wedding day, January 20th, 1968, a mob of reporters and curious spectators gathered at the Chelsea Registry Office in King's Road, London. It was a commotion as several cameras flashed and people called out for the couple's attentions. Their celebrity friends in attendance only heightened the spectacle for onlookers. Polanski was dressed in Edwardian finery, while Tate was attired in a light cream mini dress she had designed herself. Together, they were the picture of a stylish and modern 1960s couple. "Sharon and I are very happy," Polanski beamed down at the sea of reporters that gathered below the staircase after the ceremony. "I'm so happy you can't believe it," chimed Sharon. She had previously declared in 1966, "I'll give up acting the second I'm married." But when reporters questioned Polanski at the Playboy Club wedding reception of their plans for the future, he said, "No, that doesn't mean she stops working. I want a hippie, not a housewife." A clash of ideals that would cause disagreements between them moving forward. Their honeymoon included a visit to the Swiss Alps for a skiing holiday, then to Paris for the French premiere of Rosemary's Baby. When Mia Farrow and Peter Sellers came to join them at Le Hotel on the left bank in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés quarter, where they had taken over several rooms, they found a limping Sharon in plaster cast following a broken ankle in Switzerland and a bruised lip Polanski battered during a fight with a group of Spaniards who had attempted to grope Sharon. Due to a coinciding student riot which broke out at the time and flooded the streets of Paris, the couple fled to Rome, then eventually back to California to plant roots as man and wife. In 1968, chaos was also brewing in America, with the ongoing Vietnam conflict and racial protests. The assassination of Martin Luther King would take place on the 4th of April. It seemed at the time that the world was unraveling as news of violence and rising tensions flooded the papers and airwaves. I bring this up not to trivialize these events, but to paint a picture of the backdrop of their first year of marriage. When they were first wed, Robert Evans would attest the couple were just about the only really happily married couple I knew in Hollywood. But of the state of their relationship upon their return home, Sofia Comida would comment, "He changed when he returned to America." Polanski reunited with old flings and even formed new ones. To him, nothing seemed to have changed in their dynamic. Kenneth Tynan recalled an incident one night where Polanski was cruising around town and noticed an attractive woman whose body he proceeded to comment loudly on. When the woman turned around, it was Sharon. One of Sharon's friends recalled another similar incident which took place when Sharon discovered a stash of videotapes Polanski had made with his Sony video cassette camera and recorder, a novelty at the time. Polanski was away on a trip and the cassette had no label. "We put them on the machine and they turned out to be one of Roman making love to someone else on their bed." Sharon turned white and then got madder than hell. The marriage almost ended there. Their ideas of marriage and commitment seemed to be on opposing ends. Perhaps she thought that as she had at the start of their relationship when she slowly weaved herself into Polanski's life, despite his initial protest to sharing his space or settling into an official relationship, that she could change him, that she could win him over to her own ideals and change him. She'd call me in tears, another friend remembered, and say, "I know he's out with so-and-so," and I'd say, "Well, you know where the door is, walk out." She didn't, of course. Many in their close circles say it was especially around this time that Sharon turned to her former beau, Jay Sebring, for comfort, with some going as far as to claim that Sebring was like a third party in their marriage. In the late summer of 1968, Sharon began filming comedy The Wrecking Crew, a project she had already signed to complete a while before. The film took inspiration and was named after Donald Hamilton's novels. For her role as Freya Carlson, Bruce Lee, an upcoming actor at the time, was hired to train her in the art of kung fu in order to better perform her own stunts. They developed a friendship and Sharon introduced Lee to Polanski, who was so impressed with his abilities that he also took part with Sharon in lessons Lee offered in the driveway of their home after work. Compared to her previous roles, she appreciated the more light-hearted and less demanding workload. The film had a lackluster release, but many still highlighted Sharon. The New York Times critic Vincent Canby criticized the film but wrote, "The only nice thing is Sharon Tate, a tall, really great-looking girl." Her co-star Dean Martin would state that he looked forward to doing more sequels with her. In a role which paraphrases Stella Stevens in The Silencer, stated The Hollywood Reporter, Sharon Tate reveals a pleasant affinity to scatterbrain comedy. That same year, she was nominated for a Golden Globe Award as New Star of the Year actress for her Valley of the Dolls performance and came fourth behind Mia Farrow, Judy Geeson, and Catherine Houghton for a Golden Laurel Award for the year's most promising newcomer. She was also runner-up to Lynn Redgrave in the Motion Picture Herald's poll for the Star of Tomorrow, in which box office drawing power was the main criterion. With such accolades under her belt, she would go on to negotiate far more for her future projects and appearances. On February 15, 1969, the couple finally moved on from Patty Duke's borrowed property to a more permanent estate at 10050 Cielo Drive, Hollywood. It would shock the average aspiring homeowner today that the two-bedroom house with a 3-car garage, live-in caretaker, landscaper, and gardener, ample office space including one of the best views in Los Angeles, was only $1,200 a month. Sharon nicknamed it the Love House. They watched the stars as they camped out on their first night after moving in and toasted to better days ahead. A month later, they would throw a large housewarming party, inviting close friends and acquaintances totaling to about 100. John Phillips would recall, "The party was one of those everyone is here tonight affairs." Among the many guests was Wojtek Frykowski, one of Polanski's childhood friends, and his girlfriend Abigail Folger, a couple whom the Polanskis would sublet their Cielo Drive home to while they were away abroad on separate work trips. Polanski would be traveling to London to begin working on The Day of the Dolphin, and Sharon had been offered the script for 12+1, also known as 13 Chairs, a French-Italian production, and it was to be filmed in Italy and post-produced in London. She would be paid $125,000 for the role, her highest yet due to her rising image in the industry. Perhaps the decision to go back to work was as a means of distraction from an unfulfilling home life. Although she wasn't exactly head over heels on the script, several big Hollywood stars were also booked onto the project, and she was especially looking forward to co-starring with Orson Welles. She would begin filming in April that same year, but traveled first to London on March the 24th to accompany Polanski in London. But something chillingly significant would happen the day before her flight. On March 23rd, Sharon was booked for an afternoon shooting session with close friend and Iranian photographer Shahrokh Hitami. Later that afternoon, Sebring, Frykowski, and his girlfriend Folger would join them at the Cielo Drive home for a farewell dinner on behalf of Sharon. In the midst of the food, wine, and excited conversation, something in the distance caught Hitami's eye. A strange-looking man wandering across the front lawn. "I wasn't happy that he was coming onto the property and looking at people he doesn't know," Hitami later explained. He walked over to the front porch for a better view of the short, casually dressed stranger who appeared to be in his late 30s, with long hair down to his shoulders and an annoyingly smug expression. He'd said he was looking for someone. Hitami, try as he might upon further questioning after the tragic events had passed, couldn't quite remember the name of the person the man had claimed to be looking for. "This is the Polanski residence. This is not the place. Maybe the person you want is back there," Hitami angrily responded, then pointed, "Take the back alley." The man smiled and opened his mouth to speak, but just then Sharon called out, "Who is it, Hitami?" walking over to join him on the porch. He explained that the stranger was in search of someone else, and together they watched as Charles Manson walked back across the lawn and down the dirt path to the guest house. A few minutes later, now alone, Hatami would sight Manson again, walking back along the path and up the driveway towards the gate. Just months later, Manson would be the one to order the attack on the 10050 Cielo Drive in August 1969. During this time, Sharon was aware that she was pregnant since approximately late 1968. A year earlier, she had had an IUD fitted, so her doctors were at a loss of how the pregnancy came about. She knew the news wasn't something Polanski would be happy with, as he had already told her he would never have kids, perhaps not wanting to contribute another child into the world due to his own rough childhood and bitter experiences growing up in a war-torn Poland. With their 3-year relationship and 1-year marriage already showing cracks, maybe she had hoped that a child would cement them back together and Polanski would slow down and conform to her ideals with the inspiration of fatherhood. Well aware of her habit of giving in to Polanski's wants, she was afraid he would coerce her into getting rid of it, so she hid it from him. Close friends of hers would later confirm that she kept the news a secret to the point where the procedure would be too late to carry out. Sebring was the one who let her parents know that they were soon to be grandparents before Polanski had the slightest inkling. How she managed to keep the external signs hidden from Polanski was perhaps a testament to the lack of physical intimacy in their relationship at the time. When she arrived in London at their Eaton Place Mews home, they were visited that same week by Michelle and John Phillips. When she ended up in the bathroom on a smoke break with Michelle, while Roman and John chatted in the parlor, she confided in her about the news of her pregnancy. She said that she hadn't yet told Roman, and began to laugh about it. She seemed very happy, very giddy. By the end of March, she could no longer contain it physically or emotionally, and broke the news to Polanski. By then, the window of termination had already passed. Polanski's response was so dry that his first remark to her was about whether or not it would interfere with her upcoming role and how obvious the physical signs would show on film, concerns which Sharon giddily brushed off. Polanski would finally come round to the prospect of fatherhood over the preceding months, doing research and potential do's and don'ts as the caretaker of a newborn, buying books and asking around for advice from friends and doctors on how to best support Sharon during her pregnancy. According to all accounts, Sharon glowed at the prospect of motherhood. She seemed utterly at peace with herself, recalled Michelle. Every other worry or gripe, mentally or career-wise, seemed to take a back seat to the little life that she was growing. Rehearsals for 13 Chairs lasted a month and the shooting schedule only 6 weeks. The film's European release required from her a couple new scenes, and so director Nicholas Gessner shot those first before anything. He also took several other compromises around her pregnancy, particularly costume-wise, with Sharon masking her belly with props like purses, shawls, or oversized jackets. Her performance in the final cut was a testament to her strained conditions as she battled with morning sickness and mental fog. She would call Polanski constantly, begging him to come visit as she felt apparently lonesome in Italy, but he refused every time, touting work as an excuse. This only made her depressive. When filming eventually wrapped up in the summer, she finally joined him in London. The summer did nothing to improve their relationship, remembered a friend. God knows Sharon tried. She tried almost too much. But he was bored with her being pregnant. He treated her like she was a piece of excess baggage. He was even pointedly cruel to her in front of others at times, calling her a dumb hag and criticizing her whenever she expressed an opinion. And so, in London, she distracted herself with shopping trips to Regent Street and Knightsbridge, picking up things for the baby, immersing herself in preparations, causing her reliance on Polanski to wane. In her final days in London, she engaged in a Queen magazine photo shoot which she was slated to be on the cover of as a scheduled press release for 13 Chairs. On a lighter note, while they were away, Polanski received a call from one of their subletting tenants, Wojtek Frykowski, who desperately apologized as he recounted how he had run over Sharon's Yorkshire Terrier, Dr. Saperstein, while backing out of the driveway. I killed Saperstein. I heard a squeak under the wheels and he ran under the bushes. I ran after him and found him and took him to the vet, but it was too late. The only thing I ever got from you was goodness, and now I feel terrible. It's unsure if this was truly how the creature died, as during Polanski's absence, Frykowski was said to have thrown several parties where he invited all manner of guests, including shady figures, heavy in the narcotics dealership scene, and all manner of chaotic activities had gone on. Knowing how upset Sharon would be, Polanski made up a lie about how Dr. Saperstein had run away and Frykowski couldn't find him, and then bought her a new one of the exact same breed which they named Prudence. She would never be made aware of the truth. He bought her a vintage Rolls-Royce Silver Dawn for her birthday present too, which he drove up to the house and surprised her with. She was 8 months pregnant when she returned to Los Angeles on her own by ship on the Queen Elizabeth II, as she was far too along to fly. Polanski was supposed to have traveled back with her, but he backed out last minute, choosing to stay back for a while to finish up with some leftover work. Sharon was furious, but there was nothing she could do. He later admitted he really decided to call Victor Lowndes, have a ball, see some girls. To another friend he confided, "I can't stand seeing Sharon blown up the way she is. This pregnancy has made her such an insecure, nagging bitch. If I could, I'd wait until she gives birth, then maybe I could go back and find Sharon the way she used to be." It was the last time he would ever see her. After docking in New York, Jay Sebring would quickly arrive to drive her home, and she was back in time to watch the 20th of July moon landing on TV along with Frykowski, Folger, and her visiting parents. Her parents stayed until the home nursery was completed, and it would be the last time they would see her. As she waited for Roman to also arrive, she would place several calls to him, all which would go unanswered, until he finally got back to her to state that he had asked his friend Frykowski to remain in the Cielo Drive house with her, and to expect him home before his birthday in about 2 or 3 weeks, a time frame which coincidentally would fall on Sharon's due date. Word soon got back to Sharon regarding Polanski's philandering with other women, and namely with mutual friend Michelle Phillips, which hurt Sharon 10 times more than if it had been with a stranger. "We knew she planned to divorce Roman," said Patty Faulkner, daughter of Jay Sebring's business partner John Madden. It seemed Sharon, towards the end of her life, had begun to make peace with the fact that no compromise she made would ever appease or change Polanski, nor would her illusions transform their marriage from what it was long enough for her to live with. She similarly confided her plans to Jay Sebring, who had been consistently beside her while also dating Susan Peterson Jay at the time, still donning the promise ring Sharon had given him all those years ago, causing hushed gossip amongst their circle of friends. There was talk that their romance still continued, Kirk Douglas was quoted saying, even that the baby might have been Jay's. But this, of course, was only an unconfirmed rumor. On the 5th of August, Sharon threw an evening party at Cielo Drive for just about a couple friends. It was in honor of French film director Roger Vadim and his wife Jane Fonda. But this gathering to celebrate this event would be a subject of numerous rumors and later investigations, with allegations that there had been the videotaping of an assault, sexual in nature, at the event. Rumors of a darker side to the activities the Polanskis engaged in behind closed doors and amongst friends simmered following the tragedy of August 9th. Dennis Hopper would later be quoted by an underground paper saying, "They had fallen into sadism and masochism and bestiality, and they recorded it all on videotape too. The LA police told me this. I know that 3 days before they were killed, 25 people were invited to that house to a mass whipping of a dealer from Sunset Strip who had given them bad dough." Tales of videotapes discovered after August 9th stacked in the Polanski's loft, depicting pornographic content totaling to 7 hours, swirled in the circles prone to conspiracy theories. Contact depicting orgies and even Sharon engaging in activities with strangers, fellow celebrities, and also in groups. Paul Krasner would go into detail on this in his memoirs, and Manson family member and convicted murderer Bobby Beausoleil told author Truman Capote, "They burned people on deals. Sharon Tate and that gang. They picked up kids on the strip and took them home and whipped them. Made movies of it. Ask the cops. They found the movies. Not that they'd tell you the truth. But apart from one intimate tape Polanski had recorded with Sharon earlier in their relationship, the authorities confirmed that these were a mixture of unfounded lies and sensationalized half-truths with no evidence. Also, in the period of 4 months that the Polanskis were away, Frykowski would engage in all manner of risky and illegal, often induced activities within their home that would become linked to the Polanskis despite their physical absence at the time of the events. On Wednesday the 6th, she went to dinner at director Michael Sarn's beach house in Malibu with Frykowski and Folger, but had to end the night early due to not feeling well. On Thursday the 7th, she spent majority of the day with Jay, and together they attended a Universal Studios screening that evening. Jay would recall, "She was so pregnant, I'm sure it tired her just sitting through an hour episode." On Friday the 8th of August, Sharon woke up and had a morning swim. Polanski called to inform her that he would be home on the 12th of August. Later in the afternoon, when the maid, Winifred Chapman, told Sharon she was clocking out for the day, Sharon offered her the opportunity to stay the night since it was hot that day and Chapman was due to clock in again early the next day, but she declined. Sebring arrived at the house at about 6, but Sharon was still taking a nap. Debbie, her younger sister, called later to ask if she could come pick up a sado that Sharon had brought for her from Europe, but Sharon asked if she could reschedule her visit for another time. Her friend Sheila Wells called immediately after to offer parking advice at the venue of a dinner party Sharon had earlier agreed to attend, but Sharon asked to cancel as she was too tired. "I tried to persuade her to come afterwards and spend the night," Sheila recalled. "It was a very hot summer night, but she said she wanted to wash her hair and get to bed early. This was the last time we ever spoke." When Frykowski and Folger returned home sometime after 7, Jay made dinner reservations for them all at Mexican restaurant El Coyote on Beverly Boulevard. Around 9:45, they finished their dinner and made their way back home. Abigail would change into a nightgown and settle into bed with a good book while intoxicated on one of Frykowski's substances they'd both taken after their return. Frykowski stayed in the living room listening to the stereo in the same state of mild intoxication. On the other side of the house, Sharon and Sebring had retired to her bedroom. Sebring perched himself at the edge of the bed while they chatted away into the night. In his pauses, he would let out herby clouds of smoke from his rolled-up. At around 12 midnight, Frykowski would be jolted out of his sleep and open his eyes to see a trio of strangers in the living room with him. "Be quiet, don't move, or you're dead," one of them would say to him. Rising from the couch, Frykowski would demand to know who they were and what they wanted, only to receive a kick to the head that sent him falling back on the couch, stunned. "I'm the devil," Tex Watson would respond, "and I'm here to do the devil's business." When Folger looked up from her book, down the corridor, and saw Susan Atkins wandering around the house, dressed in all black, at such a late hour, she was not alarmed. It was not unusual for strangers to loiter around for a while after some party or gathering. Unusual faces will often come and go freely. In fact, she smiled and waved at her from where she lay, unaware that her boyfriend had been tied up and restrained in the parlor. Atkins smiled and waved back before continuing on her exploration through the house. She cracked open and peeked through an adjacent room to find Sharon and Sebring still chatting away, completely unaware of Atkins's presence. Atkins would report back to Watson in the living room the amount and the locations of other household inhabitants. Shortly after midnight, Sharon, Sebring, Frykowski, and Folger would be dead, murdered by members of the Manson family cult. Their bodies were discovered the following morning by the maid Winifred Chapman. Police arrived at the scene to find a young man shot dead in his car in the driveway, later identified as Stephen Parents. On the front lawn lay the bodies of Frykowski and Folger. Frykowski was said to have struggled the hardest for his life. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the coroner, said, "In my entire experience, I have never seen such savagery applied to one person. He was found lying on his right side, his head resting on his right arm. Both his shirt and pants were drenched in blood, and he'd sustained numerous stab wounds, some of which were on his left side as well as his back. Nearly a dozen to his chest, 16 to his upper right arm, 8 to his left leg, defense wounds on his hands as well as 2 bullet wounds, one lodged in his back and the other his thigh. Many of his stabbings were inflicted after his death. His skull was smashed open from Watson beating him over the head with the wooden tail end of his revolver. It was total chaos. People were running everywhere, Watson later admitted. But I was perfect. Like a machine, I had no control, like an animal, making noises, happy noises. They were saying things, but sounds didn't have meaning. I was jumping around, perfection, like from space, making happiness noises. I don't remember any of the persons. Their faces were unreal. They didn't look like people. Folger's full-length white nightgown was completely drenched in blood from the chest down, with lacerations to the left side of her face, numerous stab wounds to her torso, and defense wounds on her right and left hands. When she tried to run, Patricia Krenwinkel chased after her and continued her attack as Folger pleaded for her to stop. I remember her saying, "I'm almost dead," Krenwinkel recalled. "I felt nothing." Several wounds to her lower right stomach had resulted in an open wound about 6 inches long, through which her intestines protruded. Sebring was found in the living room area approximately 4 feet away from Sharon in blood-drenched clothes and a light-colored towel over his head in a manner similar to that of a hood. One end of a rope was wrapped around his neck, with the opposite end around Sharon's. Stab wounds were noted on Sebring's body, which pierced through his lungs, and a large abrasion appeared on the left side of his face at the bridge of his nose, where Watson had repeatedly kicked him in the face. His left eye was bruised and swollen. He also sustained a bullet wound going from just under beneath his left armpit and exiting through his 5th rib. Sharon, who had been made to witness the death of all 3 while Susan Atkins held onto her in a tight grip, pleaded with her captor in her final moments that she wanted to live and have her baby, going as far as to suggest that they could kidnap her instead and keep her until she gave birth. Then they could kill her. "I didn't relate to Sharon Tate as being anything but a store mannequin," recalled Atkins, who herself had left her 10-month-old baby in the care of others back at the Span Ranch. "She just sounded like an IBM machine. She kept begging and pleading and pleading and begging. I got sick of listening to her." Atkins would go on to describe her stabbing attack on Sharon as going into nothing, going into air, a release. Her blood splatter she would describe as a climax. Sharon was discovered in the fetal position, a gash across her left cheek with numerous stab wounds everywhere, but particularly through her chest and abdomen. The coroner's report noted that she had been stabbed 16 times and that 5 of the wounds were in and of themselves fatal. In addition, the inquest also found that Sharon was still alive when she was hung with the rope, but died immediately after from a massive hemorrhage caused by perforations in her heart, lungs, and liver. The coroner also determined that her baby boy had not been harmed in the attack and probably lived for about 15 to 20 minutes following her death. Standing over her body, Atkins, noticing the blood on her hands, would lick it off her fingers, then write the words "pig" in crimson across the front white Dutch doors. "I felt elated," she later declared, "tired but at peace with myself." The nightmarish events took just half an hour, and he left 5 bodies behind with 7 gunshots and 104 stab wounds. On Wednesday, the 13th of August, Tate was interred at the Holy Cross Cemetery, Culver City, California, with her posthumously named son, Paul Richard Polanski, in her arms, wrapped in a shroud. Sebring's funeral took place later the same day. The funerals were scheduled several hours apart to allow 200 common friends and guests to attend both. Victor Lowndes made the long drive to Cielo Drive with a police escort to select the dress that she would be buried in. a blue and yellow Emilio Pucci print mini dress, one of her favorites. There was blood all over the place. In the living room, in the bedroom. I went through the closet in a hurry. I just wanted to get out of there. Polanski requested a closed casket. The only person to view her body after it was placed in the coffin was her father. The case made headlines throughout the U.S. The Los Angeles and New York Times devoted a large section of their front pages to Sharon's death. Life devoted a lengthy article to the murders and featured photographs of the crime scenes. Polanski was interviewed for the article and allowed himself to be photographed at the entrance of the house, next to the front doors with the word "pig" still visible, written in Tate's blood. He was widely criticized for the photo shoot, but he argued that he wanted to know who was responsible and was willing to shock the magazine's readers in the hope that someone would come forward with information. The brutal attack made an impact throughout Hollywood as residents became paranoid about their safety. One reporter would write, "Terror sends people flying to their telephones when a branch falls from a tree outside." Newspapers claimed that many Hollywood stars were moving out of the city, while others installed security systems in their homes. Dominic Dunn would attest to this, saying, "The shock waves that went through the town were beyond anything I'd ever seen before. People were convinced that the rich and famous of the community were in peril. Children were sent out of town. Guards were hired. Steve McQueen packed a gun when he went to Jay Sebring's funeral." Curiosity about the victims led to the re-release of Tate's films, which achieved greater popularity than they had in their initial runs. It seemed, as it often has for so many stars, that she attained in death what she wished so much for in life. Distributors rushed to re-release Valley of the Dolls and The Fearless Vampire Killers in order to cash in on the speculations around her murder. At this point, there were no confirmed suspects or motive, as investigations were still ongoing. Tensions were made worse by the ceaseless press attentions, erroneous reporting, and sensationalized accounts from those who had known her in life, while those who remembered her kindly were largely ignored. Very quickly for many, the victims went from being victims to guilty catalysts of their own deaths, due to their alleged lifestyle of various rumored immoralities. Joe Hyams revealed in one article that Sharon had been a student of black magic and the occult. Another claimed he had been in attendance during cult meetings at Sebring's house and had Sharon greet him at the door before leading him to a dark room filled with people in white robes. Some published photographs of Tate were alleged to have been taken at a satanic ritual, but were in fact production photographs from Eye of the Devil. Polanski was later quoted saying, "The reporting about Sharon and the murders was virtually criminal. Reading the papers, I could not believe my eyes. They blamed the victims for their own murders. I really despise the press. I didn't always, but the press made me despise it." The victims were assassinated 2 times, once by the murderers and the second time by the press. Polanski himself said he began to suspect various friends and associates, primarily on revenge, due to his affairs with their wives. At one point, he held a knife to the singer John Phillips' throat, demanding to know if he was involved in Sharon's murder. His paranoia subsided when the killers were finally arrested. On September 1969, members of the Manson family were arrested on unrelated charges, eventually leading authorities to a breakthrough on the Cielo Drive murders. For over 17 months, Paul and Doris Tate trudged through court hearings and trials awaiting justice for Sharon and her son until Charles Manson was eventually found guilty by the court on Monday the 25th of January 1971. The day after what would have been Sharon's 28th birthday. The guilty verdicts recalled Doris Tate were handed down on our wedding anniversary like a gift. She would go on to say, "For the first time, I slept in peace that night." Although the death penalty would be abolished by the Supreme Court in February 1972, when Tex Watson was sentenced to death, and by then as well all other key members of the Manson family on the 21st of October 1971, Sharon's father told a reporter, "That's what we wanted. That's what we expected. But there's no jubilation in something like this, no sense of satisfaction. It's more of a feeling that justice has been done.